Thank you for coming, Ambassador.
Sure.
Just one question, but two parts. What do you think the most pressing need is immediately in the country of Burma right now? And how many years do you expect it? I mean, there's no theoretical timeline, obviously. You know, it's like China, almost 3 decades before reform started to begin to take place. But how long could you possibly see it taking place in Burma?
Yeah. Obviously, development of democracy is endless. We're working on ours. It's going to be an endless process. Civil society, it's going to be a process over time. 2015, as I say, is a marker when it comes to democratic reform. These elections that are coming up will also send signals about the ability to have a free, fair, and credible election. But 2015 are the next round of general elections, and we should be thinking, how do we get from here to there? And to watch what they do to demonstrate that democratic process, commitment to democratic process. How they deal with civil society, how they deal with open debate, how they engage their people, how transparent they are in governance. All of that is going to be an ongoing question over time. The most difficult challenge they face, I think, is how I ended, is the issue of capacity. There are people who, even if they knew, many of them don't know exactly where to start. Credibly, I'm not sure we even know exactly where to start. The needs are so vast and so great. But even if they knew and had a perfect game plan, the capacity to absorb aid, to absorb assistance, to know, to govern, the processes of governance, they just don't have a good capacity. They acknowledge this, to do this. It's been a junta, it's been a dictatorship for so long. They haven't flexed that muscle. They haven't developed cadres of people who think about managing and governing. This is probably the most important thing, this capacity question. And we're going to try and work on that urgently in the near term, but that's going to take a while. It takes human beings developing themselves, being patient, and having a sensibility. The sensibility of democratic thought is not necessarily there either. I've seen in places that have undergone transitions from whether former Soviet Union or Asian dictatorships, the people that take over are used to operating in a dictatorship. Even if they believe in democracy and they've read about democracy and they've read the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or are committed to all these ideals, in practice and sensibility, they're not used to operating in that way. It's usually top down. So that democratic sensibility is also going to be a huge challenge for all sides, not just the government, but for the civil, the opposition and others in the society. So, trying to pick out one or two most important things, I would say those are probably the most important challenges they face in the immediate term.
Thank you for your speech. I really thought it was very interesting to listen to. Do you think that if good relations with ethnic minority groups are not established, that with the reforms could lead to renewed conflict over autonomy, such as what happened in the former Yugoslavia and Soviet Union, where they fell apart and new states were formed? What do you see in the future if that happened?
That's a very good question. This is, as I said, the defining challenge of the country is division and national unity and such. And the question of whether it can hold together remains open to a degree. The majority Burmans and the military believe the only way you can hold it together is through force. They recognize, you talk to them and they say, that hasn't worked, that's not the way to go. We have to try something different, we have to try political outreach because we're draining our citizens by continuing these fights. But your question has multiple components in it, in fact. One is the ability of the majority Burmans to deal with the political demands, political desires of many of these ethnic communities in terms of autonomy or cultural rights or religious rights or other local political rights and such. And that remains an open question. I think there is a unique opportunity now for that because I think all sides are probably more ready than ever to get on with it. But it remains to be seen. It really remains to be seen. As I say, the devil will be in the details. There's another component to your question, which is not normally thought about, but those who are honest about it will comment, which is that between the ethnic groups. I mean, just because they're concerned about the oppression of the center doesn't mean there is full understanding among the different ethnic groups themselves, the minority groups. So Shan and Kachin and Karen and Mon, all of them being able to understand and get along to enable, because they're neighbors and they're mixed. Many of them are mixed in nationality, in these different areas. That's an open question. So there's going to have to be some reconciliation and dialogue there as well. And then in the endlessly fractious situation in Burma, within ethnic communities, I mean, you have majority groups, maybe the Karen National Union, which had the ceasefire, but there are other smaller Karen groups that may have different ideas of the future. And they say, we want local autonomy, we want to deal with our own affairs. Well, how they could deal with their local autonomy internally, if it comes to that. That may cause some instability and some problems and some tensions. There's a lot of work to do in terms of seeing whether that Burma can hold together in a way that is stable. I don't think it's going to fall apart. I don't think any of these different regions or states, divisions, are looking to secede. I think originally they were. There was the question right after independence. I think that is now off the table, and it's just simply a matter of reserving their rights to preserve their cultures and their way of life and their traditions. So now it's just a matter of getting those details right and building the trust, because the trust deficit is about as massive as it can be. They've been fighting for so long.
I'm Dr. Man. I'm a current refugee from Burma. I arrived here about 20 years ago. Maybe I'm the first current refugee in Kentucky. We, as refugees who have arrived here, are enjoying the freedom of USA, and we are very, very grateful for that. And we are pursuing the American dreams, but there are 100,000 refugees, not because of their own fault, just because they are born as a Korean in a Burmese land, are locked up inside the camps. Mm-hmm. Will you please consider that not to send them back? The government definitely will ask them back. I know that their tactics. And they are going to show in their TV that their resettlement program and all these things, they're going to do that. But if something went wrong, these people will be dead or being insulted. They did it one time. In 1980, they called for national reconciliation. But after that, these people got nowhere. They are being suppressed. They didn't enjoy the rights all the Burmese people have. They are a second-class citizen. So they are going to do this to the refugees who are now in the camp if you all agree to send them back. So my request to you and the government is, please let the refugee come. If you don't accept the new refugee, it's okay. But the one that are locked up in the 6th camp and in Malaysia, please try your best to let them go and settle down in democratic countries like US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, whichever country that is going to accept them before you dissolve the camps. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. It's a very important comment and reminder. Let me reassure you, or assure you absolutely, we are not going to forget about the refugees outside the country and those along the border. It is a tragedy, the ongoing situation of being in those camps and having very little hope. I mean, endless generations of people living and dying, being born, growing up, all in these camps without much hope. We have been very clear with the Thai government and others that we don't think the conditions are right for these camps to be closed. We also recognize the danger that given everything that's happening in the country, that people on the outside, in the donor community, who have, if they wanted to get involved in Burma, they would work on the border, because that's all you can do. Now there's something in the country, so everyone may rush in there and forget that these are Burmese too. These people have needs. And that is definitely front and center in my thinking. I just came from Chiang Mai. I didn't get to Mae Sot, but I got to Chiang Mai a couple Fridays ago to talk to folks, Cynthia Mong and others, about the situation. I assured them we will not forget. We will continue the funding, continue the support, and I'm going to Europe. They've reduced their funding for these camps, and I will encourage them to remember that the needs remain and that conditions are not right. So I take your point, and I hope I can reassure you that we are not forgetting.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for a fascinating talk. Has there been discussion of economic reform and its relation to democratic reform in the country? In particular, because the oligarchy, which is associated with the military families, is believed still to be in control of the economy. And how is a transformation of that relationship necessary for true democratic reform? Thank you.
Yeah, it is important. That gets to the question of sanctions, investment, of economic engagement that we have. Trying to deal with oligarchies or the so-called cronies in the system that have had a corner of the market there on resources and the hotels and the banks. Clearly there's going to have to be some handling of that situation in some fashion, either encouraging them to do more in the civic interest, or co-opting them, making them part of the governing process, or somehow dealing with potential for oligarchies to remain there. But that's where our engagement matters, and the principles behind our engagement, that we not rush in. If we were to rush in or lift sanctions and say there's a new situation and folks say, okay, let's invest in the tremendous opportunities, business opportunities. I mean, business is chomping at the bit for good reason in probably the final frontier of Asia when it comes to economic opportunity. Very rich country if only, the conditions were right. But to do it quickly, without the rule of law, without principles in place, transparency and such, I think you simply reinforce that dynamic. You probably reinforce the current system. And what we need to do is think about, as we engage them on economic reform, the principle of benefit for the majority of Burmese people, of something left behind for them, for jobs, for opportunity, for opening to invest, for land reform. It's absolutely critical, so that people can own land. Things like that, I think, can get at the question of a corrupt system or a rigged system in favor of a few, in order to give opportunity for the many. So that's in the back of that's front and center and the back of our minds as we engage on aid and economic strategy going forward, and as we engage with them directly to give them technical assistance and advice. That's where principles come in, and we will keep this in mind.
Ambassador, I guess my question is more what your perspective is on the reasons that the progress has been made in the past 6 months instead of the past 20 years. If you could point to any particular pressures or events which could potentially be generalized to other states who are under an undemocratic military regime, where the U.S. could look to see those factors at work, those types of pressures, for potential to engage other nations who we might have positive impacts on.
Right. This is the underlying question. I talk to the students about it. I get it almost every time. And from the very start, when I had debates with colleagues who would follow this issue, and I said, there might be something a little different here, they would come back and say, what is their incentive to do this? They have all the money, they have all the power, they have all the advantage. I mean, they must be up to something. This can't be real. And they'll say, this does not conform to a model of change we've seen anywhere. No one voluntarily decides to step down or to open up or to give up privilege. So this isn't real. It doesn't conform. And obviously you have to look at that and say, yeah, what's their incentive? My view on this is we're going to watch their actions. And what is behind it? There are a lot of theories behind it. You know, there is the sense, and I think this is a substantial factor. Their sense as they look around the region, that they are behind, that they are a pariah state, that they are the outlier, as they say, in Asia. And this leadership, whatever you can say about them, they are very strongly patriotic and proud of their country. And this is the legacy they're going to leave behind, that the legacy of deprivation and shame around the world. They can't even show their faces. They're a weight on ASEAN. And you know, what have they done for their people, really? You know, by most, if not all accounts, this president, Thein Sein, is honest and sincere, and clean. That's what Aung San Suu Kyi says. People who know him, who engage with him. You can't get a sense by looking face to face in one encounter and say, I've looked into his soul and, you know, I know what he believes. But you can get a sense, and other people certainly know him. And that, by many accounts, he's like that. There may be others like that who say, you know, this stuff hasn't worked for us. And this is, people will say too, this is the same government as before. Yes, but no. A lot of these same characters are the same before. The current president was a previous prime minister. The head of the lower house of parliament was the number 3 in the junta. I mean, these guys have taken off their uniforms, assumed new governmental roles. But key figures are out. Than Shui, the junta leader, is out. Meng Ai is out. And there's a different dynamic. And it could be that they truly believe that, look, this is the better way forward for their country, for their own pride. You can't put it past the spiritual aspect of things in terms of deeply Buddhist, deeply spiritual. And what happened during the Saffron Revolution of brutalizing monks in a system like that, that doesn't go well in terms of your next life. So potentially that could be a factor. You never know. We just don't know. And I guess my view is models have changed, theories have changed, change. You know, we didn't know the Soviet Union was going to go the way it did. South Africa, Poland, they all blaze their own trail according to their own conditions. The important thing is that we watch their actions. We watch their words, but we watch their actions closely and give them an incentive. I think there are other factors behind the scenes in their mind, maybe geopolitical factors in their heads, but give them a sense that their future would be much better going this direction than going that direction. And then respond to those actions. It's the only thing we can do.
I have a question from one of my friends who's a Korean. He wanted me to ask you to please, in your negotiations with the government of Burma, to consider trying to persuade them to include the use of landmines, to get those off out of their use, and also to include the removal of landmines from the properties from the different states. Until those are taken out of the different parts of the countryside, refugees can't return. Right. Their homes have been landmined, their rice fields have been landmined, and so he would like to ask you to please include that as part of the negotiations with them.
It will do. I mean, landmines everywhere are a huge problem and a lasting problem. It's the problem that continues to inflict pain years and years and years after conflict ends. So yes, that's going to be an important component. As I say, we have some new funds to help landmine victims, and when the time is right, we can get access. We'll do everything possible to demine and make these places safe again. But it's a tall order. A lot has been put down, and that should be very fair. It's been put down by all sides. Not just the government has used it; the ethnic groups have done it as well. But it hits the innocents.
Thank you for coming, Ambassador. I have a question. You talk about what we can do top down. What do you suggest that we do from the bottom up with the populace, and how we can help things better?
Right. Well, this is going to be an evolving issue over time. I think building people-to-people ties in every country, in every relationship is very important. There is an instinctive appreciation and actually affection, I would say, for the United States in Burma, is my sense. among the general population, and in fact within the elites, within the military and in the government at large. I think an informed interaction, I mean, again, I hesitate to say go to Burma and see for yourself and all. I mean, I think tourism is fine. Again, their capacity to absorb is limited, but exchanges are going to be very good to give folks access to education, exposure to processes, to sensibilities out here. Even on the military side, we stopped allowing Burmese military into our military academies in the 1980s. Those who went through the military academies always speak so glowingly about this, and it's a bond between us, and they talk about their friends here and what they learned and all the rest. As many types of interactions as we can, like that, exchanges, I think would be very important. And to not let the issue fade. I mean, we're in a very interesting period now where a light is shining on Burma worldwide. The Burmese government and the society has done that. Aung San Suu Kyi, every time she was released from house arrest, which was like 3 or 4 times, there'd be this huge light, there'd be a huge announcement and all the front page headlines about it. There'd be a light shining on Burma. When I first met her, 1995, was the first time she'd gotten released from house arrest. And the thing she said was, the thing I want you to do is don't forget and keep the light shining on here. Don't forget about us. So I don't know if I have anything perfect and specific, but a Center for Asian Democracy, or there's Louisville with the Karen connection, can be a great locus of education about Karen issues, about ethnic issues, about national reconciliation, and about Burma generally, where there really is very limited understanding in the United States, obviously. They know this woman whose name they can't pronounce, but they're not sure much more than that. I mean, most average citizens, why should they know? And so building that understanding, I think, would be a great thing.
Hi, thank you for coming. This comes from a very limited understanding of Burma, but you talked about you talked about Burma being interested in democracy and about the United States giving it incentives in order to adopt democracy. But what's the interest of the United States in Burma becoming a democratic nation?
Right. No, that's a very good question. It's actually a profound one that I think was the reason why we didn't give it the attention that many of us would have liked. Those of us who care about democracy, care about Aung San Suu Kyi, or just, for whatever reason, were captivated by this issue. Trying to explain to people why this was an essential core U.S. interest was very difficult. And even today, I think a lot of it is based on what, Senator McConnell, the leader in the Senate, is thoroughly, personally captivated by this issue in a personal way because of values. And I think it does matter in our foreign policy as individuals and as a country. That democracy matters, that people like Aung San Suu Kyi, who have sacrificed so much, represent so much of sacrifice of people inside the country, that resonates for us, and that when that voice is heard or when the voice is suppressed, it matters to the United States, that we ought to be standing by that. We ought to be standing with that. I also think, as someone who came from the Pentagon, again, putting on that more head hat, the heart hat, there are geopolitical interests in terms of Asia. The rise of Asia is a tremendous opportunity and tremendous benefit to the United States in terms of economics, in terms of political development, but economics. We're going to do more and more of our trade. And the connectivity of Burma, of South and Southeast Asia, runs through Burma, from India through to Southeast Asia. Very important. If Burma does open up and becomes a society and a system that we can invest in and engage in economically, as I said, it's one of the final frontiers of opportunity like that and can very much help our economy. Also, we have an interest in the viability of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, and of the balance of power in Asia, and Southeast Asia being unified and connected. I think in Burma has always been the outlier there. So the degree that we can facilitate the unity in Southeast Asia, Burma is going to be a critical component of that. And simply principles that we have, that we want to see when countries that are making this commitment to change, we ought to be standing by them. So is it a core national security interest? If it goes sour, does it mean the United States is at risk in any fundamental way? Probably not, no. I mean, not like in Iran going nuclear, or North Korea, what they do, or what we see, with Al-Qaeda in the past and terrorism and other things that reach our shores. But that doesn't mean we don't have a profound interest in Burma and in that region, in that broader Asian region. And those of you who have followed what the administration has been talking about, we've now talking about, the president's been talking about a pivot to Asia. We've talked a lot about 21st century being, a lot about Asia, there's going to be a shift to Asia. Well, this administration now recognizes that a lot of our future growth and opportunity is going to be in Asia. So we need to be attentive to this. We need to be fully engaged. And Burma, if the conditions are right, should be a critical component of that pivot for our own long-term interest.
Okay, we've got time for one more question. Another question.
Or three. We'll just take them all at once.
China is a country that probably has the greatest influence in Burma, and the Chinese tend not to be very helpful to the U.S. in democracy promotion or in other areas.
Well said.
Are we doing anything at all to bring China in on this, or attempting to? Are the Chinese being at all obstructionist? They do have a number of investments and interests in the country. What's that relationship? How's it playing out?
That's a very good question. Many people think, the pivot to Asia is all about China, or our outreach to Burma is because of China. Whether it's some kind of containment strategy, encirclement strategy, and there are voices in the Chinese media that talk in these terms. China has a complicated relationship with Burma. Clearly, Burma has to have a good relationship with China. They have a long border. It's 1.3 billion people on their, right along the border. They do invest. There's a lot of cross-border activity, sort of informal activity that helps, I think, in some regard, assists for Burmese interests. China has overlapping interests with us in terms of needing stability along their border, which means they would have an interest in a political solution to the ethnic question. They're the ones who take the biggest brunt of drug trafficking, of human trafficking. So in fact, we have a lot that we can be working on with China. And part of my job, as I say, is to coordinate internationally. And after the Secretary of State's visit, I immediately went to Korea, Japan, and China to talk about the visit and talk about potential cooperation. I laid out what I saw was we had common interests and the potential for working together towards those interests. The Chinese, to be honest, I think are taking that slow. They're taking the U.S., the possibility of talking together and thinking about this issue together slow. Clearly the Burmese don't want us to have this great power condominium over them, and that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about working with China on Burma or working with any country on Burma. We have a bilateral relationship, we'll work on that. But it's useful to coordinate our approaches and talk about how we might be able to work together in the common interest for the benefit of the Burmese people. And in China, there so far is, to be charitable, very limited interest right now in that. Of even looking at that. And they say there's a lack of understanding between the two sides about it. I think there's a lack of trust on their side about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So we'll continue to talk to them about it. And it should be, I think it's important for the future of Burma that the United States and China not be competitive there or not be hostile because of things going on in the country, or misunderstandings don't continue over American interest in Burma. In terms of Burma's own view of China, some of you may be aware of this issue of the Myitsone Dam, a dam that was at least postponed or suspended because of popular concerns about a Chinese investment that was believed to come at the expense of some of the local populations. There is, I think, a little bit of a backlash in the country against overweening Chinese influence there because of the way Chinese do business oftentimes and some of the principles and values that you talk about that are not exactly ours. So that's for the Burmese to work out with the Chinese. But I think our approach is to perhaps promote our own values and principles as we engage, and to see if that may be a way that Burma can have some ability to choose how it wants its own future and how it wants to be treated. But we'll take that a step at a time.